A flashlight beam cuts through the suffocating darkness of a suburban California bedroom, blinding the sleeping couple before they can even register the intruder's presence. The invader does not rush. He operates with a terrifying, calculated precision, binding the husband and stacking teacups on his back with a chilling ultimatum that a single clatter will mean instant death. This was not a robbery gone wrong, but the meticulously orchestrated theater of a predator who thrived on absolute control and the psychological torture of his victims. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, this phantom terrorized the state, evolving his methods and leaving a trail of shattered lives from Sacramento to Orange County. Law enforcement agencies were paralyzed, chasing a ghost who seemed to possess an uncanny knowledge of police tactics, striking in quiet neighborhoods and vanishing into the night without leaving a single usable fingerprint. The sheer scale of the terror was unprecedented, encompassing at least 13 murders, 50 rapes, and over 100 burglaries. Investigators compiled a profile of a highly organized, sadistic offender, someone who likely stalked his victims for weeks, learning their routines and mapping their escape routes. His modus operandi suggested a deep-seated rage and a pathological need for dominance, manifesting in prolonged attacks, where he would sometimes pause to eat food from the victims' refrigerators while they lay bound and terrified in the next room. This profound level of psychological warfare left a scar on the collective psyche of the region, forcing residents to arm themselves and turn their homes into fortresses. Decades passed, and the trail grew agonizingly cold, but the predator made a critical error by leaving behind microscopic fragments of himself at the crime scenes. Biological evidence, carefully collected and preserved in the deep freeze of evidence lockers long before the advent of modern forensic technology, silently waited for science to catch up. In the late 1990s, investigators finally extracted a complete DNA profile from these decades-old samples, linking the disparate crime sprees of the East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker to a single, unidentified monster. Despite this monumental linkage, the newly minted genetic fingerprint yielded absolute silence when run through the National Criminal Database. The system relied on direct matches to known offenders, and this perpetrator, despite his prolific and brazen crimes, had somehow completely evaded the sprawling dragnet of the justice system. The biological signature was perfect, yet it remained a key without a lock, a string of genetic code belonging to a phantom who had seemingly ceased to exist. For the survivors and the families of those whose lives were brutally extinguished, the lack of answers was an open, festering wound that refused to heal. They carried the heavy burden of the unknown, walking through grocery stores and down quiet streets, constantly wondering if the aging man beside them was the architect of their nightmares. The justice system had hit a seemingly impenetrable wall, leaving an entire generation of investigators haunted by the files piled high on their desks. The paradigm shifted dramatically in 2018 when a small, dedicated team of investigators decided to bypass the traditional criminal databases entirely, looking instead to the burgeoning world of consumer ancestry websites. They hypothesized that even if the killer had never been arrested, his distant relatives might have willingly uploaded their own genetic profiles to trace their heritage. By converting the crime scene DNA into a format compatible with these public platforms, they effectively turned the perpetrator's own bloodline into a sprawling, inescapable net. Uploading the profile to a public database named GED-Match, investigators watched as the system generated a list of distant cousins, individuals who shared small, specific segments of DNA with the unidentified suspect. This was not a direct match, but rather a genetic breadcrumb trail pointing toward a common ancestor who lived in the early 19th century. The forensic team now faced the monumental task of building massive family trees backward from those distant cousins, meticulously tracing lineages through census records, birth certificates, and marriage licenses. This technique, known as genetic genealogy, required an unprecedented fusion of cutting-edge biological science and painstaking historical research. Genealogists constructed complex ancestral webs, identifying great-great-grandparents and then tracing every single descendant forward in time to the present day. It was a labyrinthine puzzle of human history, narrowing down thousands of potential individuals to a specific familial branch that intersected with the geographical locations and timeline of the California crimes. The realization that the monster was embedded within an ordinary American family tree was deeply unsettling, stripping away the myth of the isolated boogeyman. Every branch of the tree represented normal lives, filled with teachers, mechanics, and soldiers. Yet one specific leaf hid a profound and terrifying darkness. The investigators were no longer hunting a phantom. They were closing in on a human being with a name, an address, and a seemingly mundane existence. As the genealogists whittled down the sprawling family branches, they applied the known parameters of the suspect, filtering for a male, born in the 1940s or 1950s, with a physical connection to the areas where the crimes occurred. The intersections of genetics, geography, and age eliminated hundreds of names until the spotlight finally settled on a single, compelling figure. His name was Joseph DeAngelo, a man whose background perfectly mirrored the chilling profile constructed by behavioral analysts decades earlier. The discovery of DeAngelo's past sent a cold shockwave through the investigative team, illuminating exactly how he had managed to operate with such deadly precision. During the height of the crime spree, he had been a sworn police officer, working in the very jurisdictions he was actively terrorizing. This terrifying revelation explained his intricate knowledge of law enforcement protocols, his ability to clear crime scenes of fingerprints, and his uncanny knack for slipping through the perimeters established to catch him. Having a name was not enough. Investigators needed irrefutable, direct biological proof to connect the aging man to the decades-old crime scenes. In April 2018, law enforcement initiated covert surveillance on DeAngelo, watching the 72-year-old man as he went about his quiet suburban life in Citrus Heights. They waited patiently for him to discard an item containing his genetic material, a mundane piece of trash that would serve as the final, damning piece of the puzzle. The stakeout yielded a discarded tissue, secretly recovered by investigators, and rushed to the crime lab for expedited testing. The forensic scientists extracted the DNA and compared it to the perfectly preserved biological signature of the Golden State Killer, holding their breath as the sequencer processed the data. The results confirmed what the family trees had suggested, proving the genetic profiles were an absolute, undeniable match, tying the former police officer directly to the reign of terror. On a quiet spring morning, heavily armed officers descended upon DeAngelo's neatly manicured lawn, executing an arrest that the world had waited over 40 years to witness. The man who had meticulously controlled the fates of so many was taken into custody without a fight, looking frail and bewildered, a stark contrast to the athletic, terrifying predator of the past. The announcement of his capture sent tremors across the globe, signaling the definitive end of a dark era in criminal history. The unmasking of the Golden State Killer through genetic genealogy sent a shockwave through the justice system, fundamentally altering the landscape of cold case investigations. Police departments across the country began dusting off forgotten files, realizing that the key to solving their most intractable mysteries might lie hidden in the public DNA databases. A new era of forensic science had dawned, one that promised to expose predators who believed they had successfully outrun the clock. However, this revolutionary method also ignited fierce debates regarding genetic privacy and the ethical boundaries of utilizing consumer data for law enforcement purposes. Critics raised profound questions about consent, arguing that individuals who swabbed their cheeks to discover their heritage never intended to subject their entire extended families to police scrutiny. The tension between the undeniable public safety benefits and the sweeping implications for civil liberties became a defining conversation of the modern forensic age. Despite the swirling ethical debates, the impact on the victims and their families remained the most profound and emotionally resonant outcome of the investigation. For the first time in decades, they could look upon the face of their tormentor, stripping him of his anonymity and his power. The courtroom proceedings that followed allowed the survivors to confront DeAngelo directly, transforming their enduring trauma into a powerful testament of resilience and survival. Yet, even with the perpetrator behind bars, haunting questions lingered in the minds of those who had studied the case for years. How does a human being compartmentalize such profound savagery, returning home to a wife and children after committing acts of unspeakable cruelty? The psychological chasm between the suburban father and the night stalker remains a chilling enigma, a stark reminder of the terrifying duality that can exist within the human mind. The meticulous untangling of DeAngelo's life revealed a timeline fraught with missed opportunities and overlooked connections that could have stopped him sooner. He had once been arrested for shoplifting a hammer and dog repellent, tools perfectly suited for his burglaries, yet the dots were never connected by the fragmented police departments of the era. This tragic failure highlighted the desperate need for cross-jurisdictional communication, a lesson paid for in blood and trauma. DeAngelo's ultimate confession in court, a calculated maneuver to avoid the death penalty, offered little in the way of genuine remorse or explanation. He spoke in a frail, raspy voice, a carefully constructed facade designed to elicit pity, masking the calculating intelligence that had allowed him to evade capture for so long. As investigators noted during the trial, his actions were not driven by impulse. but by a chilling desire for absolute control, a hallmark of psychopathy that remained entirely focused on his own self-preservation until the bitter end. The legacy of this case cemented the vital importance of forensic taphonomy and the meticulous preservation of biological evidence, even when current technology cannot process it. The crime scene investigators of the 1970s, who carefully swabbed victims and sealed evidence in sterile containers, were the unsung heroes of this story. They unknowingly built a bridge across time, providing the crucial raw materials that future scientists would use to finally lock the cage. Today, the methodology pioneered in this investigation has led to the resolution of hundreds of previously unsolvable crimes, bringing long overdue justice to forgotten victims. The invisible genetic threads that connect humanity have become the ultimate silent witness, an unalterable record of truth that cannot be erased, manipulated, or hidden. The shadows where predators once sought refuge are rapidly shrinking, illuminated by the relentless advancement of scientific discovery. The communities that once lived in a state of perpetual fear have slowly begun to heal, the heavy atmosphere of paranoia finally lifting from the California suburbs. The houses that were once fortified with deadbolts and alarm systems stand as silent monuments to a terror that has finally been vanquished. The scars remain, etched into the history of the state, but the paralyzing grip of the phantom has been definitively broken. The capture of Joseph DeAngelo stands as a monumental triumph of perseverance, a testament to the investigators who refused to let the darkness consume the truth. It is a chilling reminder that the past is never truly buried, and that the echoes of violent acts will inevitably catch up to those who commit them. The decades-old mystery is solved, but the profound lessons of the Golden State Killer will continue to shape the pursuit of justice for generations to come.